Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to another special guest episode of That Trippi Show. This week, Alex and I are really excited about this one. As many of you know, I'm on the board with Brady United to prevent gun violence. And this week, we're really honored to have Chris Brown, the president of Brady, joining us. She also has a Substack I'd encourage everyone to read called Locked and Loaded, which really demystifies a lot of what Brady United and gun violence prevention advocates are trying to do. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Of course. No, great to have you on.
Chris, and I know we started talking a little bit about this pre-show, and for the listeners, we're recording this pretty soon after news was breaking about this tragic mass shooting in Shreveport. And I know it's still early in the process. It's all kinds of news is coming out. It sounds like a mental health tragedy, potential domestic violence. And Chris, I know one of the things we wanted to get into today was that connection between domestic violence and gun violence.
Yeah, Alex, it's been a really tough weekend. That horrific news coming out of Shreveport is on the heels of really horrific news in Virginia with an incident of domestic violence involving someone who was an elected official, Justin Fairfax, killing his wife and himself. And to your point, I believe it's 12 to 16 hours, an incident of domestic violence occurs in this country where a woman, primarily woman, huge percentage of women, are shot and killed by a partner. That's a uniquely American statistic. And we saw the horrific spread of this. It's so often not just a partner, but children who are in the crossfire. I think the news is reporting 8 children in Shreveport were shot, and I believe all of them have been killed. It's just absolutely horrific. And the thing that's really tough about this for me as a leader of a gun violence prevention organization is we have passed tools in a lot of states that can be utilized if folks know about them and they live in a state where there's an extreme risk protection order in effect, for example, to remove firearms from someone who's a risk to themselves or others and temporarily have that person in the background check system. So you're not only removing guns in the household, you're actually preventing them from buying guns for a period of time until, for example, they can get mental health treatment or additional kinds of support can be put in place to support families in these moments of crisis, which truly is what they are. And so we look at it as the tragedy that it is, but also so much of what we do at Brady is focusing on how can we prevent this next act of gun violence. And I'm here to say these tragedies are entirely preventable with the right kind of systems in place and the right kind of education and communities to stop them from happening. And even though this is such hard news, I'm very focused on what we can do as a country in our own communities to stop the next incident of gun violence going forward, which is about extreme risk protection orders, education about them, and making sure that people in the court system, friends, community members understand these tools and how to get them in place to ensure families remain safe.
Chris, people say all the time, we hear it all the time, that nothing will ever change, when it comes to gun violence, but that's not really true. I mean, there's been a lot of progress, a lot of things have actually happened, like these tools you're talking about. So it can be prevented, but where do we start? Talk about the tools that you've passed and this sort of the notion that, getting beyond the nothing will ever change. We can change things. Brady's been working to do that with court cases and other things and tools. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk us through some of that.
Absolutely. And, I really like talking about this because it debunks some myths out there. Nothing stops a bad guy with a gun like a good guy with a gun. If gun laws worked, then places like Chicago would be the safest places on earth because they have in Illinois among the strongest gun laws. All of that is based on very faulty logic. And so let me just give your listeners some of the really good news that we are accomplishing today in the gun violence prevention movement. First, the 5 states with the strongest gun laws have a 71% reduced experience of gun death and injury of their residents compared to the 5 states with the weakest laws. So what does that tell us? That tells us that better gun laws and more gun safety laws actually materially save lives. Residents have a much higher chance of not getting shot and killed in communities which have stronger gun laws. And the other thing that the statistic are showing us, Joe, is that investment in gun safety works. And why am I saying that? Because in America today, our country is on track to experience the lowest homicide rate in an entire century. It's never been lower in 100 years. In fact, firearm homicides fell 27% over the 3-year period following the pandemic. There are a variety of reasons for that folks are looking at, but one of the chief reasons that folks are crediting are the kinds of investment we have made as a country, and the gun violence prevention movement led this, in community violence intervention, in stronger laws in the state, and education of individuals on basic practices that, by the way, Joe, don't infringe on anyone's Second Amendment rights, like safe storage of firearms. And Brady is very, very proud of our programmatic work that are leading those very kinds of conversations with gun owners, often at the helm of leading those conversations.
So you mentioned the delta between the 5 strongest gun laws, states with gun laws, and the 5 weakest. What, for our listeners, can you kind of summarize as the difference in law and policy between the 5 strongest and the 5? Like what is really accounting for that?
Yeah. Well, let me use one example and then I'll use the broader example, Alex, because I think it's important with things in the news to use a super granular example. We have this horrific instance of domestic violence with a firearm and this mass shooting of 8 children, a partner and the partner's sister that happened in Shreveport yesterday. That's in Louisiana. Louisiana a year ago considered an extreme risk protection order law. What is that? That's a law that allows firearms to be removed subject to a court hearing from an individual who's deemed a danger or a threat to themselves or others. Now, I've been reading the news like everyone else in the last 24 hours since this particular incident has been reported. And I wish I would say it's unique or could say it's unique. It's not unique. Family members of the shooter are coming out and talking about the flags, the things they saw based on what the shooter was saying about the risk posed by this individual to himself and to others if he had access to a firearm. Louisiana hasn't done the most basic thing to protect children, to protect women, to protect individuals at risk in that state by passing an extreme risk protection law. That's one example of the difference between Louisiana, which has among the highest rates of gun violence per capita in this country, compared to states that have done something on this. We now have 22 states, I believe, and counting, that have passed these extreme risk protection laws. And they're states like Florida. They're not blue states. These are policy changes that are being embraced in states across the country that understand we have more guns than people and we need tools to protect our citizens. Now, there's been additional research done, Alex, about what are the kinds of things that are happening in the states with the strongest laws compared to the states that have the weakest laws? Is there a particular formula? Are there 2 or 3 laws that are most important to saving lives? The 2 that are often pointed to are, 1, an expanded Brady background check in that state that ensures, regardless of where a firearm is sold, at a brick and mortar store, at a gun show, over the internet, that a background check is required, right, for every gun sale. That's critical. And that they have very strong permitting systems. So even if you can pass a background check, what is the state doing and saying about the kind of training, the kind of capability, about safe storage that happens, that critical education that happens before an individual resident is allowed to buy firearms? So those states that really embrace stronger permitting systems, better Brady background check system, those are materially advancing the life-saving difference in those states compared to states that do nothing.
Yeah, what I really love about Brady is, it comes from a very bipartisan, nonpartisan place, because preventing gun violence is really something that people across the political spectrum have embraced when it's put in that context. And so, I think that gives Brady better capacity to actually talk and listen to people and come up with amazing programs that you've come up with. And so I'd like for you to talk about some of those and the kind of progress that Brady's made. Obviously I'm on the board, so I know about things that have happened like in Baltimore and other places, but if you could talk about some of the things that have actually, by people, the actions of Brady and the team you've been able to accomplish, that I think are pretty amazing.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for being a great board member too, by the way. One of the key things that I focused on when I first joined Brady, and I'll date myself for a minute, I worked on Capitol Hill a long time ago in the 1990s, and that's when I got to meet Jim and Sarah Brady. And I do like acquainting everyone with the story of Jim and Sarah, because Jim was shot serving President Ronald Reagan in the line of duty. And he wanted to strengthen our gun laws in response to that and ensure that every person who was seeking to buy a firearm actually had a meaningful background check done on them. They thought it was a very simple proposition, but it took 6 years and 7 votes to get the Brady Law passed. It actually passed in 1993. When it did, it passed by unanimous consent in the Senate. That means not a single member of the U.S. Senate, Republican or Democrat, voted against that background check system becoming law. That's our legacy as an organization. Jim and Sarah were Republicans lifelong. They were gun owners lifelong. This is not an anti-gun organization. What this is a gun safety organization. And I'd like to say, Joe, given the number of gun owners we have on staff, the number of gun owners we work with, we're actually filling a void that was created when the National Rifle Association, founded as a gun safety organization, actually took a turn to really become a much more extremist organization when Wayne LaPierre took over in the 1970s. And that's when they stopped even agreeing with something that 97% of Americans want: expanded Brady background checks. When Sarah tried to get that to happen, to pass the Brady Law, she was declared by the NRA as enemy number 1. And that's just a problem for our society. There is no one that I've encountered, gun owner, non-gunner, red or blue state, who wants the Second Amendment interpreted as a death sentence to their fellow Americans. Nobody wants that. We want a rational, reasonable role for firearms in this country. That's the version of the Second Amendment that our founders were focused on. That's what we're focused on. But to make that happen, and now to answer your question, sorry for that long preamble, but I wanted to talk about our history. For any kind of public health epidemic, and that's what gun violence is, it's the number 1 killer of our kids, a uniquely American epidemic. You have to focus on 3 separate areas. That's what they did with tobacco. That's what they did with seatbelts. That's what they did with drunk driving, right? To fix those issues and solve them or try to solve them. We've done the same. We have to have better policy. We have chapters that work on state and local policy and federal policy here in DC. You have to have better enforcement of the law. We have programs that do that, and I'll talk about that in a second. And you have to have cultural change. You have to have narrative change, reframe the role of firearms in this country. And you need to have litigation. So one of the big things that we've done is invest in a multi-pronged strategy, what we say is Congress, courts, and communities, to bring forward the change that we know is possible to make guns no longer the number 1 killer of our kids. I'm very proud to say that our litigation recently had a huge success. We were able, with our trial team, we have incredible lawyers at Brady, to win a historic $62 million verdict in Baltimore against a ghost gun dealer, Hanover Armory, whose reckless practices fueled violence across the city, particularly among youth. It was really, the ghost gun market was propagated by this manufacturer, and they knew about the death toll and the injury toll, and they just didn't care. So we brought them to trial. It's the first time a manufacturer and a dealer have been brought to court in a decade in a meaningful way. And that's what happens when we go to trial. We're exposing the practices which are craven of a sector of the gun industry to the public. And I think one of the things that really motivates me, Joe, is what one of the jurors said to our trial team afterwards, which is, I'm a lifelong gun owner. I really wanted to side with the manufacturer and the dealer here, but what they did was so wrong. And if other manufacturers and dealers are doing this, I also want justice for them, against them, for the people who are harmed. And that's exactly where our focus is, Joe. We're working with attorneys general and city attorneys across this country to bring similar cases, because most of the gun dealers in the country, and we have more of them than McDonald's and Starbucks combined, are doing the right thing. But a small fraction of them, about 5% of them, are not just violating the law in small ways, they are fueling the market for illegal guns in this country, that, by the way, also gets exported to the cartels in Mexico. And we're doing other things as well, Joe, which I'm happy to talk about. But that, as a lawyer and someone who has seen the kind of change that happens with big tobacco, et cetera, that ruling is really, really important for our continued strategy and success.
But it's that kind of strategy plus what some local officials, in the city of Baltimore and other places are doing, with mental health and other things that, and recidivism and other things that actually working together really have that success of lowering the gun violence and number of homicides that are out, that have happened. That is pretty incredible. But I also wanted to give you a chance to talk about In Friendly Fire or some of the other programs that have a different impact, and also get into the influence and culture.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about Hollywood too. But let's start there, Chris, and then we'll I'll throw you some Hollywood stuff.
Happy to start there. So we do have a campaign. We started it 8 years ago. Hard to call it a campaign. It's core to what Brady does. So its campaign sometimes implies that there's a cycle for it, but this is permanent in terms of what we do. It's called End Family Fire. And as I mentioned, our North Star is looking at other kinds of social ills, whether it's drunk driving, tobacco, lack of seatbelt use, and saying, what have organizations done well who wanted to attack those kinds of public health problems? And one of the main things they did is they defined the problem, designated driver, right? Drunk driving and designated driver. And they worked with advertising agencies to go define the problem And then they created a term that everyone used to solve it. And that's what we've done with our Family Fire and our End Family Fire campaign. We work with the Ad Council, and of course, that's the organization that does PSAs in this country, from Smokey the Bear all the way through COVID. And we have now over 5 billion views of our ads. We have over 100 ads targeting gun-owning households with kids in the home to raise awareness of why safe storage of firearms is so important, right? This is assuming individuals are choosing to have a firearm in the home. We're not reframing that decision. What we're saying is, if you choose to have a firearm in the home, then please safely store it. And the amazing thing about this, and this is really researched, and we bring focus groups in. You guys are much more expert on how that works than I am as a day-to-day thing, but we have teams of people who can help us understand how to reach individuals who have firearms in the home. And what we've seen is the awareness numbers of those who understand why safe storage is so important, who go out and purchase safes and safely store their firearms, has gone from, when we started this, like 10, 12%, now to 58%. If you see our ad, you have a 58% increased likelihood that you'll engage in research around safe storage and safe storage itself. That, to me, more than almost anything else we do, can save lives, because 8 kids a day are killed or injured with a gun in their own home. 76% of school shooters get their gun from a home where it's not safely stored. 2/3 of gun deaths are suicide. Number one risk factor is access to a loaded and unsecured firearm. So that is kind of a linchpin of what Brady does. We've been working on that for 8 years, and we will continue to grow that. And that's led to our Hollywood work, Alex, just to reference that piece. So I'm happy to talk about how we got to doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the legs of the stool you mentioned was talking about changing culture. And one thing that I know Brady United has had a lot of success on is starting that conversation with Hollywood, just as an industry in general, talking about how guns are portrayed, et cetera. But, wanted to kind of, first of all, talk about the effort, but also, like, how do you actually measure the success of something like that? And for example, you mentioned when they see one of your ads, they're much more likely to go do it or look up info on safe storage. How do we get like a Hollywood effort to turn into something tangible?
That's a great question, and something we started asking ourselves when we started seeing the numbers come back through about the success of the End Family Fire campaign, which are public service announcements that run on TV between content. But then we started thinking, how can we shape the content itself and the stories being told and what people are watching? Because for a lot of folks we talk to, gun violence and guns are portrayed as a zero risk proposition in a lot of media. So how do we tell the real stories about firearms for those who choose to have them and those who don't? So that launched our Show Gun Safety campaign. That is a campaign that has 3 asks of Hollywood. 1, if you're going to show a gun, show it safely stored. 2, show the consequences of failure to safely store a firearm. We see those every single day. And 3, if you have content geared for children under 18, you don't need to have firearms as part of that. That campaign took off about 4 years ago with over 300 signatures of producers, directors, showrunners, people in the industry creating the content we see every day. And since that time, we've invested, Brady, in talent, in chapters in that area that have now trained over 3,000 screenwriters, producers, and studio executives on how to responsibly depict firearms in film and television. So that is consistent with the Show Gun Safety campaign. We estimate that about 150 million viewers have now watched projects Brady has influenced, including shows ranging from SWATs, right? So that's a show that really focuses on firearms as part of it, and rapid response, and those who are on the front lines of firearms. Station 19, which is a show on Disney involving fire first responders, to the new Little House on the Prairie reboot. So we're sort of in all elements of this. And the thing that I really love about it, that some of the showrunners have said to us, is what we like about this is you're not telling us what to say. You're not telling us what to do, which we are absolutely not doing. We are raising the stakes about the role of firearms, consistent with telling the story and consistent with real life. We all live the consequences of this every day. And so seeing it out there in the content really helps drive home the question for people: if I'm having a firearm in my home, how am I safely storing it to reduce the risk to my friends, family, and my community?
So, Chris, we're running out of time here, but I want to sort of tie two things together. One is you've written a lot and talked about hopelessness and getting beyond that to make progress. And in that vein, I'd also just like you to talk a little bit about how people can find Brady, join Brady, or get involved in helping to prevent gun violence by taking action.
Absolutely, Joe. As I hope I have, sometimes I talk too long, so hopefully I haven't talked too long here. But
No.
like everyone, there's a role for everyone here at the state level, at your local level, at the federal level. However you want to be engaged and involved, we need your time, we need your talent, we need your treasure. It's all of those things that are very important. You can go to our website to find out information about any of the things I've discussed. That's at bradyunited.org. And there are chapters across the country that are very engaged and involved in all kinds of activities, whether that's lobbying a state or local legislature, whether that's advancing our programmatic work like Show Gun Safety, like our Crime Guns initiative, or whether that's actually working with your local school to ensure that the right kind of information is provided in backpack mail at the beginning of school with respect to firearms. All of these things are super important. And that is how we have gotten the success that we've had, that we know from the data is actually materially reducing the incidence of gun violence in this country, is the engagement of each and every one of us in this cause, and there is huge opportunity for that. So again, I would encourage your listeners who are interested in learning a little bit more how you can get involved, please go to our website at bradyunited.org. It's chock full of information, and we really do need you. We need each of us to get engaged and involved, and we can change the trajectory of this issue with that kind of engagement.
Thanks, Chris, for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening to or watching That Trippi Show. We'll include a link to where you can follow Chris and help Brady United in our show notes. Also, she also has a Substack I would encourage everyone to read called Locked and Unloaded. She writes a great piece there, lots of them, and you should keep up with what's going on. That's a it's a must read. I read everyone that comes out. So please check out Brady and Chris's writing on her Substack. Chris, are you going to start a podcast, or are you going to be a guest on podcasts? Because I think you'd be very good. I don't know if you have one or not. I've been meaning to ask you that as well.
I do not have one. It's something that I've looked into. Where I am right now, Joe, is trying to be a guest on incredible podcasts that are out there like yours. And I am open and available to participate. I love doing it in any podcasts that are out there and have discussions around this issue. I would say it's just so critical because a lot of folks have perceptions around this issue. The reality is we have so much in common in wanting to do the common sense things that we're advancing. And there's a role for each and every one of us, and it builds community in this process. And I feel personally that's a critical kind of byproduct of this work, is reaching across perceptions of differences and finding actual commonalities to get this work done. And that's very meaningful to folks who are involved and engaged in our work.
Well, we'll spread the word to our podcasting friends.
Please.
Try to get you on with them. Anyway, folks, thanks for listening or watching. Make sure to join us at sez.us. It's a civil social network for real people, not bots or algorithm driven. This podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. So check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. And you can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question and a review on iTunes. Alex was remiss in getting to any listener questions this week, but now properly reprimanded. That means either he'll have some next week or he'll have some shocking surprise March Madness or May Madness or April Madness questions for me. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Chris, for being with us.
Thank you.